Hi everyone, welcome. Usually I only wear one glove, but today I'm wearing two, and if you've been with me on previous check-ins with the mixed red worms, you'll know why. It's because the mixed red worms were set up, well, how long has it been? I've got my info board right here. 245 days ago, they were set up with a bin that was built out of twine rope bedding. And in the very beginning, there was some cardboard included as well, but after all that went away, all they were left with as far as bedding goes is a whole bunch of twine rope. A lot of the twine rope was very thick in the beginning. And something we've been doing during the past couple check-ins, and it's the reason I've been using the two gloves, is taking that pretty thick chunks of twine and unwinding them, unraveling them, to make them a little bit easier for the worms to break down. So there's a whole bunch of info here. You can go through it really quickly, some of the stats about the system. But long story short, it was set up 5 weeks ago now, 35 days that we set up a wedge configuration. In most cases, I'll feed my systems down the middle, but the wedge is when you start feeding on one edge or the other, and it sort of becomes a continuous flow setup. So those are the little guys I want to check in on today. It was a pretty generous feeding last time, which was 11 days ago. Is that the one stat I forgot to include when the last check-in was? Gave you the whole life story, but I think it was 11 days ago. So they may or may not be due. It was a very big feeding, so I'm going to go ahead and get on my gloves, get the systems out on the bench, and we can get to work. Well, I attempted to get one more use out of this skin color rubber glove, but as I was trying to put it on, it tore open. So we've changed over to, what color is this? Gray, maybe? Yeah, those, busy space to be in. Wow, look at all those bulging clitellums. At least that's what it looks like to me. A lot of these worms, they look like they're ready to start dropping off cocoons. I hope that's what I'm seeing. I don't really see any worms engaged in mating actively, but some of those clitellums on those worms just seem so inflated that maybe that's what's going to happen here soon. So when you saw this system from the side, you could see this very distinct edge, looking very much like a wedge. So don't think you have to shape the system to be wedge shaped for it to actually be something that you can consider as a wedge. Like I said earlier, it's also known by another name, which is continuous flow. And continuous flow is usually refers to where the flow goes downwards, just follows gravity. But you could also have the horizontal setup where the idea is the same, where all the food and things get put in on one side, and then eventually the opposite side gets depleted of nourishment and anything else, and due to the lack of interest in it, it becomes uninhabited. You just scoop it out and you get yourself some nice castings. Alright, so I guess the whole idea behind the second glove was giving me the ability to work down some of the twine bedding should we find any larger pieces. Anything up against the far wall here that we've almost completely excavated at this point would have been the leftovers of the last feeding. And what we did in preparation for that feeding was collect up all the large chunks of twine we could, and I went off camera even for a few minutes just to unwind a whole bunch of it. And once it was unwound from being a thick fragment of rope, just to little thin pieces, we used that stuff as the bedding for the last feeding. And I believe that was the routine a couple check-ins now. So whether or not we've even left ourselves any large, thick chunks of twine needing to be unraveled, I guess is still to be determined. I mean, here, for example, is a pretty good sized piece. But I'm even starting to wonder if I want to soil this other glove if we don't find much. And well, here's another pretty good sized piece. I'm starting to get this feeling like we're gonna follow suit with what we did past couple check-ins, is just collect up whatever large pieces we can, and there might not be that many of them at this point. And I'll go off camera again, take a little pause, and unwind all this stuff into a nice fluffy pile of loose twine, and that'll become the foundation for today's feeding. Today's feeding is actually pretty similar to what they got last week, because they got a whole bunch of radish leaves. And the only thing that sets this apart from being radish leaves only is what's at the bottom of the container. I had a few grapes in there, ones that didn't really look quite right. So they were removed before the rest of the stuff was eaten. And I don't know about you, but I don't bring the stems of the grapes down here. I just bring those straight to the outdoor compost barrel and let that stuff get broken down out there. To me, that's almost like chunks of wood, practically, you know, those stems. And, you know, as far as the material that's out here on this far edge of where there's been no new bedding added, no foods applied over the past 5 weeks since we set up the wedge configuration, over on this side, we pretty much picked all this material clean of any rope that we could find, whether it was big or small. And I'm pretty sure that that's kind of what we're dealing with over here on this side, is pretty much castings only for the most part. I mean, chances are I didn't get every last piece, but the vast majority of it, I think, has been collected up and sort of processed down into somewhat more usable type bedding to include with the feedings. So I think we've definitely created a space into which we can place today's feeding. And in doing so, we've excavated portions of this edge, which would have been made up of just a bunch of collected twine. It wouldn't have been much of the, well, no, actually, here it is. Here's some more of this really thick pieces. That might be like a full-size piece. So yeah, I kind of knew that there was still some good-sized chunks remaining in here. And we acknowledged that in past check-ins too, that we're not going to go crazy trying to collect all of it. We're definitely going to be leaving a lot of it for future check-ins so that we can follow suit and tap into that as a supply of bedding type materials. And, you know, all the while the worms are still working this stuff. And, you know, it's not being ignored. But once we take all this stuff and unwind it, we'll have much finer material that the worms could make an easier meal out of. And you can even see a chunk of carrot left over from the last feeding. There was a big piece in here, that must be it. So I'm going to take a break now. I'm going to process this down into a nice lump of unwound twine material, and then we're going to combine it with the radish leaves and grapes to add to the feeding zone on this edge, and that'll be the ongoing perpetuation of the wedge with no new bedding. So it's also foraging, fed foraging in my book. So break time now. I'll be right back when I've got a handful of stuff to share with you, and then we'll pick up where we left off, giving them their feeding. Like last time, we've got about what amounts to a good handful, I'd say. And I left this really thick piece. This is a full-size piece of the twine that I started out with, that I bought home from camping, where if you take the first 3 segments, they turn into pieces that can once again be unwound into 3 more pieces, just that the wind is in the opposite direction. And that's the level that I've been taking it down to. If either of these attempt to get unwound, as I recall, at that point you don't have 3 more strands, you just have, let me just grab a little bit of it. Now you just get the fibers, you know. So there's no distinct, I mean, I guess that also holds together from the wrapping process. But I figured I would save this last one just to demonstrate what I spent the last 10 minutes doing here. Just unwinding little pieces of rope, a lot of them so fragile that they would just break, but since this piece here has been in the whole thick state for so long, these pieces, well, no, it broke quite easily actually. I figured maybe it wouldn't break so easily. And this piece right here looks a little bit thicker for some reason, but no, it's not separate segments that need to be unwound, it's just the fibers. So that's our bedding right there. Let's save a little bit to cover up with like we did last time. Last time too, all we did was we laid it out there underneath the feeding, and on went the lovely foods. And you know, I struggled with this last time, didn't know what to make of the situation, having only sort of a half a clean hand here. But I think we've managed to keep the plastic transport container much cleaner than last time. Last time it was a big mess. Alright, so I've also got my little container of coffee over here that I wouldn't mind utilizing some of, once again in such a way that I don't make a big mess. And I like the idea of keeping to the fed foraging, almost 2 months of fed foraging now, of no new bedding going in. Perhaps here and there we would just give them some coffee that came straight out of the coffee filter and leave the coffee filter as a feeding zone indicator, but for the most part, no new bedding's been going in. And they're doing a really good job in here. Degree of moisture is kind of high, so here's another piece we could have easily broke down into 3 more thinner pieces. 1, 2, 3. So stuff really comes apart so easily, it's just sort of unwinding on its own. So let's just bring back these remnants of the previous feedings. Plenty of twine material remaining in here that we can unwrap in future check-ins and use as bedding, which is kind of nice. And here and there we've got some of the leftovers we bumped into along the way. That's a pumpkin stem. Here's a second pumpkin stem. I think there was a mango seed floating around in here and other things as well. I'm not going to go hunting for it. If we happen upon it, we could place it up over there in the leaves of the radish, but otherwise we'll assume it's just going to get taken care of. One thing we didn't even look at is the material over here. And I guess if we were to start excavating now, we're going to level off significantly. It won't be so much of a wedge shaped anymore, but the wedge idea is really just indicating the difference, not so much that it has to be tall on this side and shallow on this side, but more like this side is where you add bedding and or food and stuff like that, whereas here you add pretty much nothing. And it's that tapering off of the difference of completely unfed, transitioning across the length of the system to the side where it's completely the opposite. And that's the whole concept behind it being named that way. And man, this stuff is just jam-packed with worms. It's almost like they had no interest in what was going on the feeding zone side of the bin, and I imagine they just did away with what was in there. I did feel like it was a really generous feeding. I even made mention of it during the video last time. And well, I think with this many worms, you just happen to be lucky enough to have a system that can handle it. They could just burn through really good-sized feedings in a fairly short amount of time, and then that just opens up space for even more stuff to give them. Yeah, I really like the way this stuff is looking. If I really want it to be thorough, I could just keep on picking out stuff like this piece of an avocado pit. But as long as there's still a lot of leaf stems everywhere, a little throwback to one of the applications of bedding, which included leaves recently, I assume. We've got some time before we would want to consider this stuff as like being ready for harvest. Once these little stems start to vanish, I might start thinking differently, but I think for now we're going to stick to what's been working nicely in here. The fed foraging phase continuing, and the wedge setup is kind of nice too, except how do we know where we last fed? No feeding zone indicator. Well, we'll take our chances. Let's see, maybe we can even position the little handle right on top of where the the feeding was. I think it reverses it, but that'll be our little telltale now. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. I got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up, put away. I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.